In today's video, I'm going to talk about a social experiment that was done a while back. So, what happens when you put a fake scar on people's face? I think the results will shock you. There was a study as part of this social experiment. A group of young women, they were invited to a dressing room, and they were told that they were invited to be part of a social experiment that was being conducted. And they gave consent to the researchers to put a fake scar on their face. But here's the twist. At the very last moment, the makeup artists, they told a group of women that they would do one final touch-up on their face to fix the scar in place. But when in fact, the scar was wiped off at the very last minute. So, there was nothing on their face, everything was normal. What happened next is this group of women, they were sent into a job interview, thinking that they still had the scar on their face. Every single one of them failed the job interview miserably. Almost every single woman mentioned the scar on their face was the key factor. Almost all of the women lied about the interviewer pointing to the scar on their face and telling them that the reason why they're not getting the job is because they have a facial scar. So why am I talking about this? Victimhood, it's an extremely dangerous concept. As I have mentioned in previous videos on Chinese history, you have one man that ruled the country. He had a harem of concubines. The rest of men were eunuchs that had their penises chopped off. Or there were soldiers that died in battle. Or there were poor peasants that couldn't afford to marry a woman. Sex has never been free throughout history. Have you ever thought about this? If one king or one conqueror, one emperor, if he had 10,000 concubines, that means that 9,999 men will end up dying alone. It is estimated that only 30 to 40% of Chinese men throughout history got to reproduce. This number is 90% for Chinese women. 99.9% of soldiers that died in battle are men. 75 to 80% of suicides worldwide are men. 90% of the prison population are men. 90 to 95% of victims of violent crimes are men. There's homeless shelters for women. Is there any for men? Over 90% of overdose deaths are men. Women file for divorce for 80% of the time. If they have a university degree, they will file for divorce 90 to 95% of the time. Women get custody of the children after divorce over 90% of the time. 97% of alimony go from man to woman. There's workplace quotas for women, but has there ever been a workplace quota for men? In Canada, we see all these issues with our healthcare system collapsing, that there's a shortage of nurses, and so many nurses are quitting and leaving the workplace. Has anybody ever brought up the issue that maybe the system where 90% of nurses are women is not working out? Maybe we need to put in policies that will hire more male nurses. I'm not saying male nurses will be better, but perhaps if you have a more balanced workforce, things will work out better. Nobody ever talks about that. You want to talk about the male professional athletes who are making way more money than women. What about all the female influencers and OnlyFans models that's making millions of dollars, sometimes tens of millions of dollars a year? How come nobody ever talks about a profession where a woman makes way more money than men? Is this what you call equality? In fact, what the hell is diversity, equity, and inclusion? What the hell does all of this mean anyway? Do you know what happens when you make men equal to women? You end up with transgender. I will cover this topic more in September. You tell me, who is oppressed more? When you tell someone they're a victim, let's look at the race. In the US, over 90% of interracial crimes have a black perpetrator and either a white, Asian, or Hispanic victim. Majority of the crimes in the USA are black on black. Over 90% of black people are killed by black people in the US. Why does the media never ever cover this? They only want to focus on the very small percentage of cases where a white person kills a black person. It is unfortunate, and it is wrong. Sometimes things like this happen in life. So, when a white person kills a white person, nobody says anything. A white person kills a Chinese person, nobody says anything. A Chinese person kills a white person, nobody says anything. A black person kills a black person, nobody says anything. But as soon as a white person kills a black person, everybody loses their mind. Why are 71% of black students dropping out of high school? Why are the majority of shoplifters black? Why are 80 to 90% of prison inmates black men? This is what happens when you teach critical race theory and systemic racism and victimhood in school. Okay, imagine this. Starting from grade 1, you tell this innocent 5 or 6 year old black kid that there's systemic racism all over this country, that you need to hate white people, that you will never make it in life because you're so oppressed by white people. That if you achieve something, that's black power. If you don't, it's because you're oppressed. That is dictionary indoctrination. You want to take all the credit, but none of the blame. You're always looking for a scapegoat, always looking for a patsy. The same thing happens when you tell little girls that we live in the patriarchy, that men have been oppressing women throughout history. As I've mentioned earlier, if you marry a woman with a university degree and the marriage goes south, there's a 90 to 95% chance that the woman filed for divorce against you. You can look at stats in Canada, in the US, in the UK, in France, any NATO country. It's the identical stat. Also, there's an over 90% chance that woman gets to keep the house, even if it was bought with the husband's money. Does that sound like equality to you? Listen, slavery has been happening since the beginning of time. Black people enslaved black people. How come nobody ever talks about the genocide in Rwanda that almost killed 1 million people? Oh, maybe because it was black on black. White people enslaved white people. Arabs enslaved Arabs. In fact, Arabs also enslaved white people and black people. Chinese people enslaved Chinese people. How come schools don't teach this? How come every time you ask a university student in the US about George Washington, the first thing they answer is that he was a slave owner? You don't think that's indoctrination? Millions of Chinese and Korean women became sex slaves to the Imperial Japanese soldiers during the Sino-Japanese War. Why won't they teach this in World War history? Remember this, broke it's temporary, but poor it's forever. Poor it's victimhood mentality. You never ever let yourself get into victim mentality. I have lived in the West for most of my life. I have never ever played the race card. There is no institutionalized racism in the West. That is a BS lie. In fact, you're way more likely to be accepted into schools, getting scholarships, and offered jobs if you're black, Hispanic, Muslim, or anything LGBTQ+. Anything but a straight white male. If there's white privilege, how come over 90% of people in the US that's mixed, white and black, for example someone like Meghan Markle or Barack Obama, how come they only ever identify as black? Why don't they identify as white if there's white privilege? Wouldn't that be the better option? Individual-based racism will always be there. I have to acknowledge that. You can't change that, okay? People cry discrimination all the time in the West because this is the most accepting place on earth. Why do all the immigrants and refugees want to come here? Those illegal Mexican migrants. Instead of traveling north to the US, why don't they try to escape south to Guatemala or Ecuador or Peru? Why don't you try to live in Russia or China or Iran as a black, gay or Muslim person? The West is the most just, the most sane, the most advanced, the most equitable society in the history of humanity. Yet you have all these dumb activists that wants to destroy it, like the US women's soccer team. Here we have witness testimony, we have cross-examination, we have innocent until proven guilty. Do you know what happens if you go up against Putin in Russia? You get shut down in a plane. Do you know what happens when you criticize the CCP in China? You will disappear from the face of the earth. That's what happens to you. Listen, stop being indoctrinated. I will come back to feminism, diversity, equity and inclusion, LGBTQ+, woke, slavery, declining birth rates, divorce, and finally, war and peace in a September long format video. I will also upload a multiple hour lecture style video on Patreon later this fall that will cover all of these topics in more detail. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.